This is the Baymaw Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I am looking at the pillar of discipleship through the philosophical perspective of one Reed Dent.
Philosophical?
I don't know.
I don't know if that's the...
You tend to bring the philosophy to us.
No, I don't know. I think... Well, one, I think philosophy gets a bad rap, and two, I don't know that the rap should be mine anyway. I'm looking at it through the lens of just my own life and what I do for a job.
You lead a philosophical life. You read out loud to people.
Well, I mean, that doesn't...
You make people think.
I read picture books out loud to people, not just...
That's fine.
I usually am not reading philosophy out loud to people.
Yeah, but you do it.
Although sometimes.
Yeah.
But I guess if what we're talking about is like plumbing the depths and searching for meaning, then yeah, I will happily own that. That is what I like to do. And I do it as a job with college students, which I probably should just start out by saying that I recognize that almost all of our listeners are not in that boat, that they don't have the same kind of available time and space in their schedules that college students have. And that I don't actually know what people think of when they think of the word discipleship. Probably different things. Like some people are probably just thinking of just your own personal journey of, becoming more Jesus-y, becoming more Christian. I don't know exactly how people would say it. Some people think of it as a communal thing. Some people envision practices. Some people envision, a vibe, a way of life. I will say that I think actually my life with discipleship goes through CCF, through Campus Christian Fellowship, the ministry that I work at. And when we did the Pillars community episode a little while ago, I talked already a lot about my thoughts about discipleship.
Yeah.
Because for us, like at CCF, community and discipleship, they go hand in hand. We are a community of discipleship, or for the purpose of discipleship. Our discipleship happens in the context of community. And so like I talked about these three legs, or I talked about it as a sort of three-way joint of friendship, conversation, and spiritual practice. And so if anybody is wondering what I mean when I say that, and you haven't listened to the Pillars community episode, just hit pause and go listen to that one, and then come back and you will know what I'm talking about. And for us, this is just kind of the three, if you think of it like a three-legged stool, these are the three sort of legs that discipleship stands on. So we make friends because we think that genuine friendship is the best context for pursuing God, for trying to follow in the way of Jesus. It involves honest conversation about all kinds of things that are both spiritual and not. And it also involves the practices that we do together, gathering for worship, reading the text aloud together, participating in some of the sacraments together, and all of that kind of stuff is what discipleship is. So I've already talked about, if you're looking for here's how to implement or some practical ways that you can try to do that, I guess the other episode would be just as well for that. And so now I just want to reflect. I was thinking this morning in my office about how my life discipling students actually not plays out conceptually or theoretically, but really how it just goes with them and what I have learned about it after doing. So I've been working in campus ministry for 18 years now, and was a student participating in campus ministry and discipleship before that. Mm. And the first thing I want to say about it, and the older I get, this is the fun thing about campus ministry, Brent, is that every year I am getting older. And every year college students stay exactly the same age.
Yeah.
That my quote unquote congregation, or my constituency, so to speak, is always 18 to 23. And I stopped being 18 to 23 a long time ago. And so what I have seen is this prayer played out, the prayer that we have talked about on this podcast several times before, of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And that is that indeed the work of God is a slow work. And when we think about discipleship, which again is just to say how we together become more the people that God wants us to be, become more in line with the way of Jesus in the world, that this is a slow work. And I love college students, but I see now, like when I look at where they are at, and I look at where I am at, and I look at how I have come to be there, and the pace at which we advance and how long it has taken me, I can say for sure that the work of God is a slow work. And so anybody who is just wanting to pursue discipleship in community or with somebody else should expect that. If what you have in mind is like, I'm going to pick up a disciple and I'm going to have a program and we're going to do this program for this amount of time, and then boom, out of the other side of that, like a conveyor belt going through the pizza oven at Domino's, it's going to come out the other side fully baked, ready to eat pizza disciple. I wish Trush was on this. That is not really how it works. Becoming disciple, doing discipleship together is a slow work, and it requires bearing with each other through stages of instability. And so as I have mentors who have mentored me, and as I have mentored other people, I have seen that a lot of the process is just bearing patiently with one another in the progress we're not making, in the ways that we are stumbling and tripping and falling and having to learn the same lessons over and over and over again. And so it's a slow work. It requires stages of instability, and it may take a very long time. It may, and it probably will take a very long time. And so the first job of discipleship, as we dive in together to follow in the way of Jesus, is not to rush this work, not to come to the subject at hand, which is whoever it is that we are doing discipleship with, and lean too heavily into our program for what's going to happen. This actually reminds me of, there's this great passage in The Pastor by Eugene Peterson. Do you know this book?
I don't think I might know it, but not realize the name.
So Eugene, rest in peace, Eugene, a great mentor, not personally to me, but through his writing and through his speaking, he wrote a memoir called The Pastor. And it's just about reflecting, it reflects on his 50 plus years of pastoring in a congregation.
Yeah.
And he has a section where he talks about growing up, and his father was a butcher. And when he was a young man, like a young teenager, he started going to work with his father and learning how to do cuts of meat. And he has this great meditation on what he calls submitting yourself to the material at hand, which is to say that, when you cut up any kind of, an animal, that meat has grain. It has a way that it is meant to be processed and cut up. And if you just come at it like hacking at it with your own will of like, this is how this meat is going to be cut, then you're going to get messy results. You're going to get inefficient results. But if you learn what the thing is, and then you submit yourself to that and try to go with it, I mean, you're still doing something to it with your knife, and your skill as the butcher. But if you enter into the reality, not of what you wish it was, and Lord knows if you've ever tried to mentor somebody, like it's hard to get over expectations of, here's what this person's going to be. This is what they should be like. And usually if we're honest, it's like me, right? They should be like me.
Yeah.
But, being good in discipleship, like having fruitful discipleship, in other words, is not rushing that work. And it is paying attention to, just curiously, what is this person in front of me? And how has God made them? What are their passions, their desires? What are their weaknesses? What do they do better than me? What do they do worse than me? And just kind of taking note of all of that, humbly speaking. Eugene says, this is what humility is to yield to the thing rather than imposing your will on it. And so we pay attention to that in one another. We're not rushing the work of God. And what you see when you start to pay attention is you see things like discipleship is not all up to me, right? I come as a mentor with something for my students, but God is really the one who is like doing the watering. It's like what Paul says, where he's, Paul, he planted, Apollos watered, but God gives the growth. And you start to see growth happening. And our job is then to pay attention to that growth and to cultivate it with a certain wisdom and a certain skill, but that is appropriate to where the thing is in this moment. And again, not where you think it ought to be, not what you think it must be, but to what it is.
So looking back on Marty's conversation, which you haven't heard, but I'm sure you have heard, he was talking about how first century discipleship looked and what he means when he says discipleship is like what Jesus was doing. And one of the things about that is like, you do all these things with the rabbi with the purpose of becoming just like the rabbi in his walk. And I think if we actually look at all the disciples, none of them are actually like Jesus in every way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the purpose is they're just like him in the essential ways. So trying to get somebody to conform exactly to who you are, like to your interests and like all of those things, like, yeah, that's not realistic, even though we might think about that. We might want that.
Yeah.
But getting them to be like you in those essential spiritual elements.
Yeah.
I think that's a good distinction to make. I like that you.
Right. So personality is different. And, Peter is a very different personality from John, is a very different personality from James. Well, John and James kind of seem similar to me, but Thomas, right? Yeah.
Matthew.
I mean, for sure. These are all very different personalities, and they are also different skill sets. And we have to let that be what it is. Like, it's not about recreating somebody in my image, having a bunch of Reed Dents walking around who read out loud to each other and who are Enneagram 5s, That's not what we want. But the spirit, in terms of the spirit of Jesus, the spirit of the Christ, that is self-giving for the sake of the world in love, that is the thing that we're trying to cultivate in one another, and then to encourage faithful expression of that in the way that is true to the disciple, which is not necessarily my way of doing it, and that's not your way of doing it, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm also intrigued by the fact that you include the friendship element, because if you had asked me to look at your ministry and say, like, what parts of your ministry are discipleship? Because at the beginning, you're like, we're a community of disciples. Like, that's what we're doing all the time. But I'm looking at your ministry and I'm like, well, you got these, Sunday night or whatever it is with like 200 students in the room. Like, that's not discipleship. But I think you're saying that it is. Like, that is an essential element. You're building that friendship. You're building that allows the other stuff to play out. So I like that you include that in the process.
Let me get to that in 1 second, actually, because that's what I want to talk about with the idea of discipleship being a forge. But first, I want to acknowledge, too, I know that Marty, he's a very disciplined guy. He has his habits, his routines, and there is a really good way of doing a part of discipleship that is very much like training habits by repetition. It's the do after me thing, right? And so people come in and they're students, they're mentors, and it's like, this is how we pray. This is how we read the Bible. This is how we memorize the Bible. This is what time we get up, right? And it's like an imitation kind of thing, an imitation game. It's setting an example. It's being a model that other people emulate. And this is not just in terms of spiritual disciplines either, but I think it's also like, this is how we ask questions, and this is how we explore questions. This is how we serve. This is how we navigate conflict. Even I think this is how we play, which is a very important part of life. And it's like, watch me. This is how we do it. And again, it's not so that you become exactly like me, but like if I believe that it's not just about, my personality or disposition, but that there are actually like practices that are beneficial, I'm going to show you this is how we do this. And maybe that practice is beneficial for you. Maybe it's immediately like a thing that the student grabs onto and they're like, I love this. And maybe it's not immediate and it requires a little bit of discomfort on the part of the student to say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this new way of praying that I've never tried before. And maybe they acclimate to it. I see this all the time with our students. We observe Lent and we observe Advent, and we have students coming to our ministry who have never done that before. And so we say, okay, this is how we do this. This is how we fast. This is how we pray. And we invite them to come along with us. And for some people, it's like, they're just not there yet. And again, that's okay. It's not my job to make them want to be there. So all of that, yes. Marty has a great program going, even like hearing some of his stories from before when his disciples were like living with him or coming to his, like, it's like from the first of the morning to the end of the night. And that is all great. I think to your point, though, about what you might think of as discipleship or not think of, like in terms of activities, is this a discipleship activity or not? I think about discipleship as a kind of forge. And the first part is like heating up. And so we share time together to create certain conditions, right? And the whole life is the context. And so this is like evenings by the lamplight, sitting in my living room. This is mornings at the table, like sitting there with a cup of coffee. This is when we play, even like when we stay up late and we play games, or when we go out onto the field and we're playing Ultimate, or we're playing, like, this is all a part of creating certain conditions. And those conditions, again, are like friendship and trust and understanding, where I know who you are, not just from answers you give me to Bible questions or like in a classroom setting, but I know who you are, you know, when you get fouled in a pickup game of basketball and like how you react to that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or like when, you know, you feel like somebody is maybe like playing a little underhanded in a board game. Like we know each other in this way, right? And it's about also work. It's about, you know, it happens in weddings and in funerals and in parties. It happens around fires. It happens when we share meals together. It happens when we participate in prayer and worship and sacrament and text. And all of this life context shared time together is like bringing something to temperature, right? It's getting hotter and it's getting hotter and you can't rush it. But what I have seen is that there are moments that arrive then when the forge is like really, really getting hot, so to speak, moments of like vulnerability, moments of receptivity, moments of honesty, moments where between two people, not just, I don't want to frame everything as like student and teacher or master and disciple, because it's mutual, right? It's something that we share together.
Yeah.
And I can benefit from students just like they can benefit from me. But like there's a true recognition of this other person, right? It's like, some people call this like a thin place, where suddenly it's like we are perceiving one another a little more deeply. We are even maybe attuned to like there is a holiness in this moment where God is. And I don't mean to say that it's just like some deep Zen kind of thing, but there are moments where a door opens and then when the iron is hot, you strike. And there's like a word or a gesture even of, maybe it's of wisdom offered between people. Maybe it's of encouragement or a word of rebuke, or maybe it's inspiration. Maybe it's a moment of confession and absolution. It's a moment where it opens up and there can be a real, I think, a call, so to speak, a word spoken into the depths of someone to go the way of Jesus more, not just necessarily in like, this is the next step you have to take tomorrow, but like, here is a word for your life to like, you know, cease your faithlessness, or to trust, or this is what bearing the image means for you. You know what I mean? And like the discipleship is like that moment when the lesson is able to hit. Like I'm thinking of Peter and Jesus walking along the way, and Peter is like, how long do I have to put up with my brother and forgive him?
Yeah.
And I think maybe he literally means Andrew, like his literal brother. And, you know, there's a whole context here between Peter and Jesus. And here's this moment where Jesus is like, aha, the iron is hot and I'm going to strike.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to give a word that is this parable of the unforgiving servant, you know? And now the discipleship is like the thing that's happening all along the way that's creating these conditions for receptivity, for vulnerability. And then it's also the thing that happens in that moment. And I have seen sometimes this happen like in a weekend. And I've seen it also be a thing that takes years, where, you know, like sometimes I will meet with students semi-regularly, maybe even we're meeting once a week or once a month or every few weeks. And this can go on for years before it feels like we get to that really real sort of moment where it feels like something transformative is happening. And then you realize that when that transformative thing is happening, that actually the transformation is, again, something that's been being cultivated all along the way. And sometimes it's more palpable and sometimes less so. Is that making sense? I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you might come into somebody's life at just the right time when something monumental is about to happen to them. They're going to, you know, lose somebody close to them, or a significant life change in whatever way that is. And you get to see how they respond in those more intense situations. But yeah, a lot of times it does take years, if not decades, to like really see the depths of somebody's, like, who are they really? How do they respond in this terrible situation? Like I think of Philip. Like, how does Philip respond when his family is threatened with their lives? When he's threatened, like, you can't, I don't know what the dating is on that event, but he was He was preparing for a long time for that moment. And then that was the time that you got to see who he really is. And his family too.
Yeah. So really, like, for people who are considering or wondering what expectations should be, if you're like, okay, I want to try to be really, we use the word intentional, which is I want to pay attention. I want to call attention to someone. I mean, it could be for people who aren't working amongst college students and you have jobs that you go to and you work in an office or you work in a shop or you work wherever you work, or maybe your work is at home where you don't have students just walking through your door being like, disciple me,
Right.
I don't know. Like, I feel like this is an invitation to curiosity and attentiveness and prayer to where God might lead. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's your child that you're being called to disciple. Certainly, if you have children, this is a call on our lives. And you realize more than ever in raising children what a long con discipleship is and how much, slowness and attentiveness and patience that it requires. Maybe it's somebody that you work with. And again, this is not to say you're going to go up to them at, the office tomorrow and be like, hey, do you want me to disciple you?
Yeah.
But in terms of like, if what you are trying to call out in another is like something of the true image and something of faithfulness to the way of Christ, you in your own mind and heart can begin to do this, to creatively sow seeds for this, long before the actual subject of like spirituality is ever even, broached. And you can choose to be intentional with someone else. And by be intentional, I mean you are paying more directed attention to who they are and what they are doing and what is going on with them, But it's an invitation as you do that to exercise patience, to exercise restraint, to exercise relinquishing expectations and attentiveness, to know a person before you, just presume to be like, and now I know exactly what your life needs, Yeah. Anybody can introduce a program, and I think it's fine. It's good. But everybody can just like, let's do a daily Bible reading program together. Okay, great. But is there care? Is there cultivating concern? Like, is that given to this person outside of those times, outside of those quote unquote, like spiritual things? It's about discipling, mentoring one another, less by program and more by wisdom.
Yeah, I think with kids in particular, whether you are intentionally discipling them or not, they are paying attention to what you're doing. So you really ought to be intentional with your kids.
For sure.
But I think there are many other places in life where somebody is watching what you're doing and they are learning from you. And are you aware of that? Like, is there some intentionality that you can bring to that work? And maybe it's literally your job. Like maybe you're working at McDonald's and you're taking orders and somebody is watching how you interact with customers. And are you teaching them the things that you would want to teach them? Are you being intentional about like, oh, well, this kind of situation, I'm saying this sort of thing, but this person has, a different kind of problem. So I'm doing this. Like there is intention you can bring to that. And then that, like you're talking about, is bringing the temperature up on the forge. And that will lead you to potential opportunities where you can disciple them in a much more significant way than taking orders at McDonald's. But that's where it starts.
I've been reading this, what is maybe becoming one of my top 5 favorite books ever.
Ooh.
Slowly diving into it. So we've talked about Robert Farrar Capon on the show before with his book about parables. He has a book called The Supper of the Lamb, subtitle A Culinary Reflection. It's like a weird book. Like it's kind of like a cookbook, and it's also theology. Like he'll be literally walking you through a recipe and then like a 2.5-page digression on the nature of God and the world. And it is like, it's funny and it's opinionated and it's, I think could make you a better cook legitimately. It's just incredible. But he at times rails against this, how sometimes we treat things too quickly. We're only concerned with what they are meant to mean or what they are meant to do rather than just with what they are. We get concerned with how can I use this, whether it's a person, whether it's a situation, even whether it's an onion. He has like this incredible, 4-page meditation just on sitting with an onion and like just being with the onion. And then this sounds so weird. I know this sounds so weird to people. They're like, what is he talking about? But like, first,
this is what I'm talking about, Reed. The philosophical perspective.
Okay, that's right. Granted. But like first coming to a recognition of just what something is in itself.
Yeah.
And I think this is where good discipleship starts. And it's too easy for us to be like, Reed, just give me the program. Give me a 12-month discipleship program. And in month 1, we're studying this virtue. And in month 2, we're doing this spiritual practice. And, break it down by month, by week, by day. And I'm like, well, no, let's not start there, because people aren't just blank slates to have a program like imposed on them. If we're going to disciple each other well and actually have an impact on people so that they are formed more into the image of Christ that they specifically, like that you, Brent Billings, are meant to be, or that I, Reed Dent, am meant to be, we have to start with just careful attention to what is a Brent Billings and what is a Reed Dent. And then as we learn that and as we come into contact with that, it's almost like, and this is what I mean, like when the iron gets hot, like when we are able to behold each other, it almost doesn't even matter like what the program is, because those moments are so real and so holy and so like just the act of like speaking together and listening and what emerges from that. I'm thinking, Brent, of when everybody was at my house, you were there and Josh was there and Elle was there and Marty was there and Leanne was there, Trush was there. Do you remember this when we came to Kirksville for our little retreat thing?
Yep.
It was like at some point, I'm not going to give away a bunch of, like, this is a personal thing, so I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail. But there was a point in the evening where it got just like really real. And we were able to speak to one another in a way that I know was like transformative for those of us who were there. And it didn't start because I was like, all right, well, here's the program for tonight, guys. Here's what we're going to do. When you come to my house, it's going to be this from this time to this time. And then we're going to have a discussion about this.
Yeah.
It was like just learning to be present and to linger, to like slow down and to linger long enough to notice anything.
Yeah.
And then the discipleship comes out of that, like the ability to speak a word of wisdom or a word of like call to faithfulness or inspiration or something that comes when we stay, when we linger, when we regard each other for what we really are. So yeah, you're right. This is totally philosophical. And yet it matters because what we're talking about is like deep, meaningful things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not passing any judgment on your philosophical leanings.
I know you're not.
We need your perspective because it does absolutely matter.
But just people say philosopher or philosophy and like immediately it's like you just conjure up, Nietzsche, like sitting around, like saying things that probably are,
sure,
they're deep, but nobody understands what's being said.
There are certain things like I know how respected Monty Python is in the, in the world of comedy. Mm-hmm. I cannot stand watching Monty Python.
Okay.
But I love my friends quoting Monty Python. And I think that's maybe like this. Like I can't read philosophy, but I love listening to you talk about it.
See, you're regarding me. You're beholding me.
Yeah. So thank you for discipling me in philosophy, Reed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really like most of what I have to say about it. The last thing I have is just thinking about the fruits that I hope discipleship bears in us. And what I tell my students is, again, if you want to make it nice and neat and like a 3-pointed thing, then I would say the fruit of discipleship is that we actually follow the way of Jesus, that the thing that we are shaped into is actually what we said at the beginning of the conversation, that while our personalities and our passions, our talents and skills, our interests are all going to be very different, and rightly so, we're not trying to make everything just homogenous. The unifying thing is, what Paul writes, have this mind amongst yourselves. That is the hymn about the self-emptying Christ, that the fruit of discipleship is that we become people who actually give ourselves in love for the world. Not just dutifully, right? Not just kind of drearily so as like simply obligation or something, but that in doing that, we actually become fully alive, that the fruit of discipleship with one another is like a deeper and more vibrant life. Like when Jesus said, I come that you have life to the full, or when he said, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete, or when he said, my peace I give to you, that actually like the fruit of discipleship is that it comes to abide in us, peace, joy, life. And then the last thing too is that we partner with God. The fruit of discipleship is actually going out into the world and seeing what shalom like we can help to bring about. So we become people who are more about flourishing and more about justice rolling down, more about being fruitful and multiplying, not simply in the sense of kids, but in all kinds of ways. I think actually here there's an opportunity to even think vocationally about discipleship, which I know is like an impact thing, about like you're changing the world not by becoming a bunch of missionaries and priests, but actually in whatever your field is. And there's an opportunity for you to mentor, to apprentice, to disciple people who are in your field who maybe are coming in after you, and to say, if this is going to be a call that is used for kingdom, this is how that can look. This is what that has looked like for me. And so, yeah, those are the things. That is what I hope we start to see more and more as we live lives of discipleship, following the way of Jesus, becoming fully alive, partnering with God to put the world back together. That's it. That's all I got. That's my discipleship pitch. You want to join? Be at my house at 4 a.m. tomorrow.
Oh my gosh. I'm out.
Okay. Well,
I can't even go to the 8 a.m. men's breakfast at my church. 4 a.m. is not my jam. I need like a 4 p.m. discipleship thing.
I appreciate your realness here.
11 p.m. discipleship. That's when I'm really getting started.
That's so real, dude. That is, and in college ministry is what I love. Like my best conversations are happening like late, not super early.
Yeah.
Which at some point they become the same thing. But
right.
I mean, I think what Marty does is great. And I'm like in awe of that. And I also think it's like psychotic and crazy. Like you're waking up at what time and doing what? Like I will be in bed. We'll find another time. But it's real and it's good.
Yeah.
If I could, I would. I just can't. Anyway, that's it.
All right, Reed. Well, to late night discipleship, we've got we'll run the gamut of perspectives here. I don't know. We haven't recorded Elle's episode yet, so we'll see what she has to say. But,
I'm excited to hear what she has to say for sure.
All right. Well, listeners can find a couple of links in the show notes in your podcast app or at BEMAdiscipleship.com. You can use the contact page to get in touch with us. Check the news page for what we're up to. Reading our, we're plotting and planning some stuff. We're trying to figure out, if we're going to do any special things.
And if this thing actually can happen, it's going to be like my favorite Bama thing ever, Brent. It really is. That's no lie.
Yeah, so we'll see. So keep an eye on that. Sign up for the Bama Messenger so you get those things announced to you in your email inbox. But yeah, thank you for joining us on the Bama Podcast today. We'll talk to you again soon.